He invited the alien girl into his tent to warm up, not expecting what happened next. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's return to our main character, Evan Hale, alone on the frozen deserts of Vesk. 9 as a storm of charged ion dust hammered against the thin walls of his remote survey tent, each blast shaking the aluminum frame like a warning from the planet itself. And while his instruments flickered with static interference, he caught a faint life sign on his scanner, a single biological signature less than 300 feet away, fading fast. And in that instant, curiosity dropped away and instinct took over because no one, human or alien, survived long in that kind of cold. Evan grabbed his visor, yanked open the tent flap, and stepped into the brutal wind, the grit stinging across his faceplate like burning needles. And through the swirling whiteout, he saw a slumped shape half buried in the drifts, a slender figure with glowing blue skin dimming like a dying ember. And when he reached her, he realized she was breathing in short, shallow bursts, the kind of breaths a body takes when it's minutes from shutting down forever. He didn't hesitate. He scooped her up, feeling how impossibly cold she was even through his insulated gloves, her skin clinging for a second to the synthetic fabric like frost welding to metal. And he sprinted back toward the faint amber light of his tent, boots crunching and sliding over ice sheets as the storm roared louder, almost as if trying to reclaim what it considered its own frozen victim. Inside, the tent heat washed over them, weak but steady, and as Evan lowered her onto his emergency cot, he recognized the delicate bioluminescent patterns on her cheeks, markings he'd only seen in old expedition files about the Lyrini, a species rumored to be able to sing through their skin, yet exceptionally vulnerable to extreme temperatures. And seeing her shivering violently, he knew his heater wasn't enough because the storm had damaged half the coils and the temperature inside was dropping by the minute. Her eyelids fluttered, revealing faint silver irises filled with confusion and fear, and the first thing she whispered wasn't gratitude or a plea for help, but a sharp, strained accusation as she reached for a blade that wasn't there, asking him why he brought her inside and what he wanted, her voice cracking from the cold. But Evan raised both hands slowly and told her he wanted nothing except to keep her alive, because leaving her outside would have been a death sentence no matter what species she was. Her trembling intensified, her breath hitching as the thin blanket failed to stop the cold sinking deeper into her bones, forcing Evan to make a choice because their only functioning heat source was a compact thermal pad designed for direct conduction, meaning someone had to share body heat to stabilize her core temperature before hypothermia shut everything down. And he knew from training that Lyrini physiology reacted differently to human warmth, but he also knew that doing nothing meant watching her die. He slipped off his gloves, pressed his palms gently against her upper arms, and felt her skin twitch at the shock of real warmth. Not synthetic heat or air, but the living heat of another being. And although she stiffened at first, her instincts battling her mistrust of humans, her shivers slowly tightened into controlled breaths as she leaned unconsciously toward the only warm point in the frozen world around her. As the storm continued to batter the tent with metallic howls and pulses of blue lightning, Evan adjusted the thermal pad closer, trying to shield her from the flickering drafts, and she watched him with a wary, almost wounded intensity, as if trying to understand why someone who owed her nothing would risk the cold, his supplies, and possibly his life just to keep a stranger breathing. And though she said nothing more, her eyes softened with a question she wasn't ready to ask yet, a question about trust, survival, and why a human on a dead ice planet would choose kindness when the universe rarely rewarded it. Slowly, with the faint hum of the heater fading in and out, the tension in her shoulders eased, her breathing steadied, and for the first time since he found her in the storm, she wasn't shaking uncontrollably, and Evan felt the weight of the moment settle in. The understanding that bringing her into his tent had just pulled him into something much bigger than an act of rescue, something he was not prepared for, but could no longer walk away from. The storm outside the tent rumbled like a living creature pacing in the dark as Evan Hale watched the alien girl, slowly regained fragments of awareness, her glowing markings pulsing faintly beneath the survival blanket. He kept his hands near the thermal pad, ready to adjust it again if her temperature dipped. Hours had passed since he carried her through the ion blizzard, but the adrenaline in his chest refused to settle because every breath she took still sounded too shallow, too fragile, like her body was negotiating with life itself. When her eyes finally opened fully, they focused on the ceiling first, then on him, suspicion tightening every muscle in her face. She tried to push herself upright, but the movement triggered a violent shiver that forced her back down. Evan moved slowly, palms up, showing he meant no harm. He spoke gently, telling her she was safe for the moment and that the storm was still too strong for either of them to leave the tent. She studied him with an expression he could not read, somewhere between defiance and exhaustion. Her voice trembled when she finally asked where her blade was. Evan nodded toward the small aluminum tray on the equipment crate. He had disarmed her earlier when her body nearly convulsed from the cold, but he had placed the weapon within her line of sight on purpose. Trust, especially with someone who clearly had none left to give, could not be forced. She looked from the blade back to him, surprised that he had not hidden it or confiscated it. Evan kept his tone calm as he explained that he only moved it to stop her from injuring herself in her weakened state. Her silver irises narrowed, searching his face for deceit, but his steady expression seemed to disarm her more than taking the blade had. A gust of wind slammed the tent wall outward, rattling the carbon rods along the top seam. The heater flickered, sending a thin line of cold air across the room. The alien girl winced at the temperature shift, and Evan immediately adjusted the heat regulator to compensate. She watched the motion, her jaw tightening with something like reluctant curiosity. Nobody risked resources for strangers on Vesk 9. Not humans. Not anyone. For a moment, the only sounds were the low hum of damaged coils and the scratch of the storm outside. Then she spoke again, her voice quieter, the defensive edge fading. She introduced herself as Ari'Asha, a name that rolled like a soft ripple of water but carried weight behind it. She explained in fragments that she had been separated from her group during an ambush, that she was not supposed to be this far from the southern ridge, and that the storm had swept her away before she could signal for help. Evan listened, absorbing every detail. Her gaze dropped to the thermal pad where her hand rested near his, close enough to sense the warmth radiating from his skin. She admitted that her species' physiology reacted unpredictably to certain forms of heat, and that direct contact could be dangerous if applied too quickly or too intensely. Evan reassured her that he had monitored her vitals on his scanner and adjusted the heat levels gradually, which made her stare at him with an unreadable intensity, as if she had not expected a human to understand anything about her biology. Another jolt of wind thumped against the tent, and Ari'Asha flinched involuntarily. Instinctively she reached toward Evan, catching herself midway and pulling back, cheeks flushing with embarrassment. He pretended not to notice her reaction, focusing instead on tightening the tent cables. When the storm roared again, she finally whispered the question that had been silently hanging between them. She asked why he saved her when doing so risked his rations, his shelter, and possibly his life. Evan shrugged lightly and told her that leaving anyone to die out there would have haunted him forever. The simplicity of the answer stunned her more than any complicated explanation would have. As she processed his words, the glow along her cheek markings softened into a calmer hue, like distant embers regaining strength. For the first time since the storm began, Ari'Asha's breathing steadied, her pulse smoothing into a more even rhythm, and Evan realized that despite her earlier suspicion, she no longer looked like someone preparing to fight or flee. She looked like someone trying to understand a kind of kindness she had never experienced before. Outside, the storm howled on, but inside the tent a different kind of quiet settled, fragile yet undeniable, the beginning of a trust neither of them expected. The storm weakened to a distant growl against the canvas as the first hints of morning light bled through the frost lining the tent seams, and Evan Hale sat near the entrance with a handheld monitor, tracking the readouts of both the weather and the alien girl still wrapped in the survival blanket behind him. Ari'Asha's temperature had stabilized overnight, but the delicate glow along her cheek patterns flickered with restless uncertainty, as if her body was slowly rebooting from the brink. When she stirred, her movements were sharper now, more intentional, and she lifted herself to a seated position with a grace that seemed to return piece by piece. She caught Evan watching the monitor and eyed the device warily. He reassured her it was just a standard life sign reader, nothing invasive, merely a way to ensure her system did not crash again. She hesitated, then nodded, though the tension remained in her shoulders. She asked if the storm had passed, and Evan answered that it had mostly cleared, but strong ion winds still whipped across the flats, making it unsafe to venture out for at least a few hours. Her jaw tightened, as if time mattered more to her than the cold. That was the first sign something was wrong. The second came when she asked, almost too casually, if he had contacted anyone about finding her. Evan shook his head. He told her that his long-range transmitter was fried from the storm, and even if it had been working, he would not have broadcast her presence without knowing exactly what she was running from. Her eyes snapped toward him, a sharp glint of alarm flashing there. She asked how he knew she was running at all. Evan gestured lightly at the torn clasps on her travel harness, the unusual scarring along the metal, the way her pack had been sliced rather than damaged by weather. He explained that those marks were not made by the environment. They were deliberate. Someone had attacked her. Her breath hitched, the glow patterns along her neck dimming into a tense blue. Evan did not push her, did not demand answers. He waited, silent, hands resting loosely on his knees. After a long moment, she admitted she had been ambushed near the ridge by a group she called the Heliox Wardens, a name Evan recognized only vaguely from old frontier rumors, stories of heavily armed trackers who delivered fugitives to the highest bidder. She told him she had been separated from her team and forced into the storm while trying to escape, but when Evan asked what crime she had supposedly committed, she looked away and said nothing. That silence was louder than any explanation. A sudden thud outside rattled the tent frame, and both their heads snapped toward the sound. Evan grabbed his scanner. A single metallic ping lit up the screen, 30 feet out, moving slowly across the snow. Ari'Asha's breathing quickened. She whispered that the Wardens used small reconnaissance drones shaped like ice beetles, nearly invisible in the frost. Evan frowned at the scanner. This one was not drifting with the wind. It was closing in. Instinct took over. He reached to dim all interior lights, reducing the tent to a soft red glow, barely visible from the outside. Ari'Asha watched him, startled by the efficiency in his actions. He pulled a thermal cloak over her bioluminescent skin until every glow mark was hidden. She whispered urgently that if the drone detected her unique energy signature, the Wardens would converge within minutes. Evan told her to stay still and scan the tent's outer perimeter again, tracking the small metal object creeping closer through the blizzard haze. The drone paused directly outside the tent wall, its faint mechanical chirp blending with the wind. Ari'Asha's eyes widened, her breath going still as stone. Evan killed the remaining heater coil for a few seconds, plunging the tent into cold silence. The temperature dropped, biting instantly against his skin. The idea was simple. No heat signature, no glow, no movement. Nothing for the drone to pick up. A long, breathless moment stretched between them. Then the drone shifted direction, moving back into the storm. Ari'Asha exhaled shakily, the glow marks returning in subtle pulses. She looked at Evan with a new expression, one that carried both disbelief and something gentler. She murmured that she had misjudged him. Evan only nodded, rubbing warmth back into his hands as the heater reignited. He did not tell her that he had done the same, misjudging her intentions, her story, her secrets. Outside, the wind roared again, as if warning them. Both that this temporary safety would not last, and inside the tent Ari'Asha finally whispered the truth. The Wardens were not hunting her because she was lost. They were hunting her because she was forbidden to be found. Morning on Vesk, 9 arrived without warmth, a pale silver glow creeping across the frozen flats, while Evan Hale crouched near the tent's entrance, recalibrating the damaged heater coil, with hands still stiff from the cold blackout moments earlier. Behind him, Ari'Asha sat wrapped in the survival blanket, her bioluminescent markings shifting in slow pulses that betrayed her attempt to remain calm after revealing that the Heliox Wardens were hunting her not simply as a lost traveler, but as someone they were forbidden to allow back into the open. Evan did not push her for more. Instead, he listened to the faint hum of the coils stabilizing, letting the steady sound reassure both of them that the tent, for now, remained a safe bubble against the hostile world outside. When he finally turned to her, she was watching him with an intensity that felt sharper than before, as if every movement he made carried meaning she was only now beginning to understand. She asked quietly why he risked shutting off the heater entirely when drones could not harm him specifically. Evan reminded her that exposure at their altitude meant frostbite in less than 5 minutes, hypothermia in 10, and death in 20. He told her that stepping into cold that severe was a stupid thing to do, but he would have done it again if it meant keeping her hidden long enough to survive the night. Her gaze flickered downward, and the glow along her collarbone brightened in a soft, conflicted rhythm. She began adjusting the edge of the blanket with trembling fingers before admitting that the Wardens were not simple bounty hunters. They were elite enforcers tied to the inner politics of her own people, and their orders were absolute. Anyone who discovered her was to be silenced, regardless of species or intent. Evan absorbed that silently, the weight of her words settling like fresh ice between them. He asked her what possible threat she could pose that demanded this level of pursuit. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, caught between fear and fatigue. Instead of answering, she asked whether his survey vehicle was operational. Evan explained that the engine block was intact, but the navigation system had been fried by the storm, and the windshield had taken a hit that made visibility worse than piloting blind. Ari'Asha insisted that they needed to move the moment the ion winds softened enough for travel. She said staying in one place too long made it easier for the Wardens to triangulate energy signatures from afar. As if responding to her warning, a distant metallic crack echoed outside, carried by the shifting air. Evan grabbed his handheld scanner and swept the area. Nothing appeared, but the nature of the sound made his pulse spike all the same. Ari'Asha pulled the blanket tighter and whispered that reconnaissance drones often detonated small ice pockets underground to test for hidden heat sources. Evan muttered that the storm had barely died down, and already the Wardens were probing the area. He began packing his limited supplies, snapping battery packs into place, checking seals, tightening straps. Ari'Asha struggled to her feet, but swayed immediately. Evan moved to catch her, but she steadied herself on the tent pole, refusing help. She insisted she could walk. He did not argue. He simply shifted his pack toward her side of the tent, so she would not need to bend or strain. She watched the gesture in silence, her expression softening again in a way that suggested every small act of consideration was something foreign to her experience. As he reached for the tent flap, a faint vibration pulsed through the ground. Ari'Asha's eyes widened, her markings flaring bright in alarm. She whispered that something heavy had landed nearby, too heavy to be a drone. Evan killed the lantern instantly, plunging the tent into a dim red glow. Both of them held their breath. Outside, slow mechanical footsteps crushed the crusted snow, deliberate and searching. Ari'Asha leaned closer, her voice barely a breath as she murmured that the Wardens had found them sooner than expected. Evan tightened his grip on the emergency flare launcher at his hip, his heartbeat syncing with the quiet rhythmic thumps approaching their thin canvas wall. And in that moment, he understood that saving her had thrown them both into a fight he had never intended to join, yet one he could no longer walk away from. The heavy footsteps outside slowed, crushing the frozen crust of snow in deliberate, predatory intervals, and the entire tent seemed to tighten around Evan Hale and Ari'Asha as if the fabric itself understood the danger looming inches beyond its walls. Evan kept one hand on the emergency flare launcher at his hip, the other hovering near the dimmed lantern switch in case he needed a burst of light to blind whatever stood outside. Ari'Asha's breathing had gone silent, her markings reduced to faint, trembling pulses barely visible beneath the cloak he had wrapped around her earlier. Her tension was not fear alone. It carried recognition, bitterness, and something that resembled resignation. Evan leaned close enough to whisper, without sound leaving the tent. He mouthed the question asking if she could identify the steps. Ari'Asha nodded, then pointed toward the ground with a slow, controlled movement. She traced a line in the air that he understood as a warning. One warden, not a drone, not a scout, a ground enforcer, the kind he had only heard about in exaggerated stories told among survey crews. The kind that never traveled without a reason. The footsteps circled the tent once, then twice. Snow crunched under heavy armor. Evan felt Ari'Asha tense as the metal frame of the tent shifted slightly from the weight pressing against it. She whispered barely audibly that Wardens could sense tremors through the ground, picking up vibrations from breathing, heartbeat, even the shift of muscles under clothing. The tent held its breath, matching them. Evan reached for her hand without thinking, not to comfort, but to still her trembling. He felt her flinch at first, then steady beneath his grip. The steps stopped. A low mechanical click sounded, followed by the unmistakable hum of a thermal scanner sweeping the exterior. Evan saw the faint blue glow cutting a smooth arc across the ground outside, its frequency so specific it would pick up any residual heat, even through the insulated floor panels. Ari'Asha's fear pulsed through her markings again. She whispered that the scanner was tuned to detect Lyrini biothermal signatures. Evan acted before he could think his way out of it. He pulled the thermal cloak more tightly around her, sealing the edges, then pressed her against his chest, burying both of them under a second insulated layer. His body heat rose sharply against hers, enough to blur their temperatures into a single mass on any basic scan. She stiffened for one heartbeat, then another, unsure whether to trust the sudden closeness. But she did not pull away. Outside, the scanner hum deepened. Evan held his breath and counted the seconds. 3, 6, 9. At 12 seconds the light flicked off. The Warden shifted, metal plates scraping together with a predatory rhythm. Then, slowly, its steps faded away into the storm haze. Evan kept holding her until the last echo vanished. Ari'Asha finally exhaled, her body sagging with the release of tension. Her glow returned in sharper, faster pulses, the natural reaction of her species to adrenaline wearing off. She looked at Evan with something like disbelief, as if she could not decide whether he had saved her or sealed their fates together. He let go gently, stepping back to give her space. But her eyes lingered on him with a new softness she tried but failed to mask. She whispered that Wardens did not simply retreat. They withdrew only when certain of a heat anomaly caused by the terrain itself. Evan shrugged and said the scanner probably blamed the nearby geothermal vents. She stared at him for a long, quiet moment. Then, unexpectedly, she admitted the truth. She told him that Lyrini physiology reacted to human contact in specific ways, especially in moments of fear, which meant that when he shielded her with his body heat, every pulse of her markings had broadcast emotional signals she had no way to hide. Evan froze as the meaning sank in. She watched his reaction with faint amusement and mortification battled in the bright shimmer of her skin. She said humans could not read the patterns, but any Lyrini could. Her heart had been exposed, literally glowing against him. Evan rubbed the back of his neck, unsure whether to apologize or pretend he had not noticed anything at all. Ari'Asha wrapped the cloak tighter, her cheeks brightening with a glow that resembled a blush. Then her expression shifted, hardening with resolve. She said they needed to leave immediately. The Wardens would return with reinforcements, and the next sweep would not be a simple scan. Evan grabbed his gear, slinging his pack over his shoulder. Outside, the storm had broken into a blinding calm, the kind that felt like a trap laid by the planet itself. Ari'Asha stepped to his side, still unsteady but fueled by urgency, her voice steady as she whispered that whatever happened next, neither of them would be able to walk away untouched. And for the first time, Evan understood she did not just mean the danger. The wind outside had quieted into a deceptive stillness, the kind that made every instinct in Evan Hale's body tighten as he and Ari'Asha moved across the icy flats toward his half-buried survey crawler. The sky above them shimmered with the electric residue of the night storm, faint green arcs crackling between distant clouds like the planet was still trying to shake off the chaos that had nearly killed them both. Ari'Asha kept close, her steps careful but determined, her glowing cheek markings softened under the hood of the thermal cloak. She pointed out the faint ripple in the snow behind them, a subtle distortion left by the Warden's heavy armor. They were being tracked, but she did not need to say it aloud. Evan could feel the tension in the air like a live wire. When they reached the crawler, he dug out the ice-packed hatch and yanked it open. Frost dusted the interior seats, but the engine responded with a low, reluctant groan as he powered it up. Ari'Asha climbed inside, scanning the interior with a cautious glance. Evan told her to buckle in just as the engine coughed and steadied, humming like a small, stubborn beast awakening from cold paralysis. Ari'Asha touched the dashboard lightly, her fingertips glowing as they traced the faint Lyrini script he had marked on it years earlier during his first expedition. She asked softly why a human would take the time to learn a language most considered obsolete. Evan shrugged and told her he learned whatever kept him alive in unfamiliar territory. Her expression shifted, a faint warmth threading into her gaze. As the crawler pushed forward across the snow plains, the horizon warped with shimmering heat mirages even though the temperature remained far below freezing. Ari'Asha leaned closer to the window and explained that the storm had destabilized pockets of ionized air, creating temporary distortions that interfered with navigation satellites. Evan smirked and said that meant the Wardens would have trouble pinpointing them as well. She corrected him gently, stating that Wardens did not rely on satellites. They relied on instinct, training, and the ability to predict what desperate people would do next. Evan's smirk vanished. The crawler hit a ridge of packed ice and shook violently, forcing him to grip the steering column tighter. Ari'Asha steadied herself with one hand on the console, her other hand instinctively reaching out to brace against his shoulder. She pulled back, flustered, but the contact had already happened. The glow along her wrist brightened, betraying her pulse. Evan tried not to notice, but her markings reacted like tiny flickers of lightning, responding to her racing heart. She sensed his attention and tugged the cloak lower over her arms, embarrassed. He cleared his throat and focused on the ice road ahead. They moved for several minutes in silence until Ari'Asha finally whispered the question that had been simmering since dawn. She asked him why he had chosen to shield her when the Wardens scanned the tent, why he had risked revealing himself when he could have hidden alone. Evan answered simply that he could not watch someone die when he had the power to stop it, and that the universe had enough cruelty without him adding to it. Ari'Asha stared at him as though she had never heard the concept spoken so plainly. Her voice softened into something almost fragile as she admitted that among her people, kindness had become a rare and dangerous currency. Before Evan could respond, the crawler's rear sensors beeped sharply. A metallic signal flashed on the screen, approaching fast. Ari'Asha's glow markings surged bright in alarm. She whispered that the Wardens had found their trail, and this time they were closing in from above. Evan slammed the crawler into a higher gear, the treads grinding over the frozen terrain as he pushed the engine beyond safe limits. Ari'Asha braced herself as the first shadow swept across the icy ground beside them, long and angular like a predator diving out of the sky. Evan muttered that flying was cheating. Ari'Asha murmured that Wardens did not care about fairness. All they cared about was obedience. As the shadow arced around for a second pass, Evan tightened his grip on the controls and whispered that if they wanted her, they would have to go through him first. And for the first time since landing on Vesk 9, Ari'Asha believed him. The shadow above the crawler tightened into a precise spear of darkness as the aerial warden descended, its thrusters carving twin lines of heated vapor in the frozen air, while Evan Hale gritted his teeth and forced the crawler to accelerate beyond what the aging engine had ever been designed to endure. Metal groaned. The tread spat shards of ice in chaotic sprays, and Ari'Asha clung to the support bar as the vehicle bucked over rugged terrain. Her markings glowed in rapid pulses that signaled fear, urgency, and something deeper that she kept fighting to suppress. The first blast came without warning, a streak of condensed ion fire detonating 10 feet behind them, shaking the crawler hard enough that the console flickered and spat static. Evan swore under his breath, bracing his shoulder into the steering column to stabilize the sudden skid. Ari'Asha warned him that aerial wardens were not meant to disable. They were meant to intimidate prey into revealing their direction. Evan muttered dryly that it was working. Another blast scorched the snow ahead, forcing him to jerk the controls left. The crawler slammed against a ridge of ice, nearly tipping. Ari'Asha gripped his arm to steady herself, her breathing sharp and unsteady. She leaned closer and said the warden was testing their reactions, triangulating their intent. Evan's eyes narrowed as he spotted a jagged canyon splitting the plain ahead, a deep fissure created by tectonic frost heave. If they reached it first, he might use the narrow passage to shake the warden, but it was a gamble with consequences measured in seconds. The aerial warden descended again, its armor gleaming with reflective titanium, its visor flickering with scanning lenses. Ari'Asha's glow marks flared in recognition. She whispered that this one was Commander Tyr, a tracker of her rank. Evan shoved the crawler into a dangerous speed. The engine screamed in protest. Ari'Asha grabbed the dashboard and shouted for him to slow, but he told her that if they slowed, they died. The Warden swooped low, activating a sonic pressure field that rattled every bolt in the crawler. Ari'Asha winced, covering her ears. Evan's vision blurred for a second as the vibrations hammered through his skull. He forced the crawler onward, closer to the canyon's edge. The Warden fired again, this time intentionally missing by inches. Snow erupted in a blinding wave, and Ari'Asha gasped as a shard of ice sliced across her cheek, leaving a streak of glowing turquoise blood. Evan glanced over, eyes blazing with something fierce, protective, and immediate. But another blast shook the crawler, snapping him back to the controls. He yelled for her to brace herself as they crashed through a brittle overhang. The canyon yawned beneath them like the open jaws of some ancient creature. He did not slow. The crawler launched off the rim, crashing hard onto the lower shelf below with a metallic howl that sent pain shooting up Evan's spine. The treads skidded violently before catching traction. Behind them, the Warden hesitated, wings adjusting. It was too large to descend directly into the narrow passage. Ari'Asha realized it too. She leaned toward Evan and whispered that he bought them seconds, nothing more. He nodded breathlessly, gripping the controls with white knuckles. The canyon walls glowed faintly with refracted ion light, the tight passage casting long shadows that moved like ghostly fingers as the crawler roared through. Ari'Asha's breathing steadied enough for her to speak. She told him the Wardens would send ground units into the canyon. They never pursued alone. Evan exhaled sharply, sweat freezing against his brow. He asked her the question he had been holding since dawn. Why were they hunting her with such ferocity? Ari'Asha hesitated, her markings dimming. Then she reached into her cloak and pulled out a small, crystalline data core. Its inner light shimmered like captured starlight. She said the core contained evidence of a conspiracy within her own ruling council. Evidence that someone close to the throne was planning to destabilize the Lyrini system and blame it on outsiders. She had been chosen to transport the evidence to the only safe place left, her exile colony. But the Wardens intercepted her escort, killed her guards, and chased her into the storm. Evan's jaw tightened. He asked if she understood that carrying something like that made her a threat to every faction involved. She nodded, her voice trembling as she explained that her people believed her dead. If she returned alive, the truth would unravel everything. The crawler jolted as a new noise echoed behind them, the unmistakable metallic rhythm of armored footsteps entering the canyon. Ground Wardens. Multiple. Evan pushed the crawler faster, even though the engine temperature had climbed into the danger zone. Ari'Asha placed a hand on his arm and whispered that she understood now why she survived the storm. Not because fate was kind, but because she had crossed paths with a human whose stubbornness outweighed his fear. Evan did not answer, but something in his expression hardened with purpose as he drove deeper into the canyon, knowing what waited behind them and what peril lay ahead. And for the first time, neither of them questioned the cost of staying together. The canyon narrowed into jagged stone corridors that forced Evan Hale to slow the crawler just enough for the engine to stop screaming, but not enough to let the armored footsteps behind them gain ground. The echoes of the Wardens bounced off the mineral walls in a rhythmic pulse, a reminder that they were not chasing prey out of duty but out of conviction. Ari'Asha gripped the crystalline data core tightly against her chest, its inner light flickering like a heartbeat reacting to danger. Her glow marks shifted colors with every vibration of the crawler, broadcasting emotions she clearly wished she could hide. Evan caught the shift out of the corner of his eye, but he did not comment. Instead, he focused on maneuvering through the narrow canyon bends, each turn a blind gamble between escape and collision. Ari'Asha finally spoke in a trembling whisper, asking Evan if he understood what carrying that evidence meant for her people. Evan nodded without taking his eyes off the twisting path. She explained that the Lyrini Council had been infiltrated by factions that wanted to collapse the outer colonies and blame the humans, setting off a conflict that would reignite dormant wars. The data core held proof of the conspiracy and of the planned detonation of strategic outposts. Her mission had been to deliver the evidence to a colony of exiles who still believed in the old laws, the ones that valued truth over power. Evan absorbed the information silently. His jaw tightened, and Ari'Asha saw the change in him. She realized, maybe for the first time, that his determination to protect her was not born out of obligation but out of principle, a principle her own people had abandoned long ago. A metallic roar echoed overhead, and both of them looked up as the aerial warden reappeared, hovering above the canyon ridge like a vulture with thrusters. Its visor glowed with triangulating scans, struggling to track them through the distorted rock formations. The canyon curved sharply, and Evan steered into the bend without hesitation. The crawler scraped stone, sparks trailing behind them. Ari'Asha steadied herself by gripping his shoulder again, a motion that sent a jolt through her glow marks, painting soft streaks of light along her jawline. She pulled away. Too quickly. Whispering apologies, he waved off. They raced deeper until the canyon suddenly widened into a cavernous basin carved by centuries of sub-zero winds. Giant pillars of ice rose from the ground like ancient monuments, each one humming faintly with trapped ion energy. Ari'Asha stared at them with shock. She told Evan these formations could disrupt Warden sensors more effectively than any canyon. If they could hide among them, even for a moment, they might buy enough time for the crawler to cool and recalibrate its systems. Evan guided the crawler between the ice pillars just as the first ground warden emerged from the canyon mouth, towering and broad, its armor reflecting the pale light like a blade. The warden paused, scanning the basin. Ari'Asha ducked low, whispering that her markings would give them away if she did not dim them manually. Evan told her to stay still, his voice low but steady. The ice pillars refracted light into fractured beams, scattering reflections in ways that confused the warden's sensors. Ari'Asha's breathing softened, controlled, almost meditative as she forced her glow to dim. Evan held his breath as the warden turned slowly toward their hiding place, its visor whirring with recalibrations. The aerial warden hovered above, communicating in a series of coded pulses that echoed through the cavern. Ari'Asha whispered urgently that the wardens were analyzing heat patterns. Evan shut off the engine entirely, plunging them into a silence so sharp it made their own heartbeats sound dangerously loud. The ground warden stepped closer, scanning again, its visor pausing on the exact pillar they hid behind. Ari'Asha pressed the data core into her chest, silently praying to whatever ancestral spirits still listened. Then, in a sudden burst, a massive geyser of ion vapor erupted from one of the outer pillars, releasing built-up pressure from the storm. The blast sent a shockwave across the basin, throwing off every sensor reading in the area. The aerial warden lurched upward, its thrusters flaring wildly. The ground warden recoiled, its visor flickering with interference. Evan seized the moment, powering the crawler and steering them through a narrow gap between pillars. Ari'Asha held on tightly as they accelerated toward a hidden opening on the far side of the basin. Behind them, the wardens recalibrated, their metallic roars echoing in frustration. Ari'Asha looked at Evan with awe and something warmer, something she had long buried. She whispered that no one in her life had ever risked so much for her, not even those sworn to protect her. Evan did not meet her gaze, but his voice was steady when he told her they were not done yet. They had one final chance to outrun the wardens and deliver the truth. And this time, she would not be running alone. The hidden opening at the far end of the basin funneled into a narrow ice tunnel, its walls glowing with trapped ion light that flickered like frozen lightning as Evan Hale pushed the crawler forward, the engine grumbling under the strain of terrain it was never built to cross. Ari'Asha held the crystalline data core close, her glow marks shifting in anxious waves as she looked back and saw the silhouettes of the wardens breaking through the haze behind them, their armor reflecting the fractured light like predators born from the ice itself. The tunnel widened abruptly and spilled into an open plateau, its surface flat and shimmering beneath the pale twin suns rising over Vesk 9. In the distance, a faint structure jutted from the horizon, an abandoned relay tower, rusted and leaning like the skeleton of some long-forgotten sentinel. Evan recognized it instantly. He recalibrated the crawler's course. The tower's old broadcast dish might be dead, but its underground power capacitor could still hold a charge if manually jump-started. And if they could amplify the data core's signal through the tower's long-range array, They could transmit the evidence to allied colonies before the Wardens cut them off. Ari'Asha understood his plan the second she followed his gaze. Her breath caught with fragile hope. But as they neared the structure, the ground shook behind them, and the aerial warden descended with a roar that sent shards of ice raining from the cliffs. It opened fire, scattering blasts across the plateau, each strike erupting into plumes of vapor and molten frost. Evan jerked the crawler into evasive turns, the vehicle skidding dangerously close to deep fissures in the ice. The ground wardens advanced in a coordinated sweep, tightening the net. Ari'Asha clutched the console and whispered that they would not escape this time. Evan pushed the crawler harder, his voice steady as he promised her they only needed seconds, not miles. They reached the relay tower just as another blast rocked the crawler onto two treads, nearly flipping it. Evan killed the engine and jumped out, pulling Ari'Asha with him. The cold hit like a hammer. He raced to the base of the tower, prying open the rusted hatch with a pry bar. Sparks crackled from the old capacitor, but there was just enough energy left to attempt a manual pulse. Ari'Asha inserted the data core into the power slot, her hands trembling but precise. As the tower hummed to life, the wardens closed in, their heavy steps crunching across the plateau in perfect formation. The aerial warden descended until its shadow swallowed them whole. Ari'Asha told Evan to step back, her voice tight with resignation. She said the wardens only needed the core, not him, and that he could still flee if he acted now. Evan ignored her. He positioned himself between her and the encroaching wardens, squaring his shoulders. He reached into the crawler and grabbed an emergency flare, igniting it in a burst of blinding crimson. The wardens paused. Their scanners recalibrated rapidly, confused by the flare's volatile temperature signature. Evan hurled it at the ice fissure behind the wardens. The flare detonated, triggering a chain reaction that split the plateau like cracking glass. The ground beneath the wardens gave way, collapsing into a deep cavern of ice and shadow. The aerial wardens surged upward, struggling to stabilize. Ari'Asha activated the tower's transmission as a wave of energy surged through the dish, sending the encrypted truth shooting across the sky in a streak of brilliant blue light that cut through the dawn. The aerial warden, sensing mission failure, dove toward them in a reckless final strike. Evan grabbed Ari'Asha and shielded her with his body as the warden's impact sent a shockwave across the plateau. Ice shattered. The world trembled. And then, silence. When the dust settled, the aerial warden lay broken at the edge of the fissure, its visor flickering weakly before going dark. Evan pushed himself up with a groan, checking if Ari'Asha was hurt. She opened her eyes slowly, her glow marks brightening as she realized the data had been transmitted. The truth was out. Her people would know. The wardens could no longer bury her existence or the conspiracy she carried. She looked at Evan, her voice barely a whisper as she asked why he had stayed when every calculation said he should have run. Evan brushed frost from her cheek, his breath visible in the freezing air. He said simply that leaving her was never an option. Ari'Asha stared at him, her markings shifting into a soft, radiant pattern, one reserved among her kind for moments of profound gratitude and something deeper. She rose shakily and extended her hand. He took it. Together they stood on the shattered plateau as the first full light of dawn touched the horizon, casting long shadows that intertwined on the snow. No more words were needed. In the silent glow of morning, Ari'Asha looked at Evan with eyes that finally held peace, and for the first time since fleeing into the storm, she whispered a truth meant only for him, that when she had been lost in the cold, it was his humanity that had brought her back. And as the wind softened around them, the camera of the universe seemed to hold its breath, capturing the quiet, fragile moment where danger ended and destiny began.